Mr. President, I come to the floor today to express my deep disappointment that once again, Republican obstructionism and procedural tricks are preventing this body from carrying out its constitutional duty and responsibility, its obligation to consider important presidential nominations. Now, this time, the target is Mr. Tom Perez, the President's extremely qualified nominee to be Secretary of Labor. The Help Committee, of which I chair, was scheduled to vote on his nomination at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Well, obviously, we're not doing that. An anonymous Republican has invoked an obscure procedural rule to prevent our committee from meeting at that scheduled time. This pointless obstructionism is extremely disturbing. I would like to point out that we had previously been scheduled to vote on his nomination in my committee 2 weeks ago. But in an effort to bend over backwards and to be accommodating to our colleagues who requested more time to consider documents related to the nomination, I deferred it for 2 weeks as sort of senatorial courtesy. This time, there is no allegation that they have had insufficient time for consideration, just delay for delay's sake. Now, the nomination of Tom Perez has been before our committee since March. We've had our hearing, during which Mr. Perez fully answered all questions posed to him. I cut off no one. I allowed anyone to ask whatever questions they wanted. Mr. Perez has met with any interested senator personally and answered over 200 written questions for the record. It's an understatement to say that his nomination has been thoroughly vetted. So this continuing delay is unconscionable and only hurts the American workers and businesses that rely on the Department of Labor each and every day. As our country continues to move down the road to economic recovery, the work of the Department of Labor is becoming even more vital to the lives of our working families. Whether it's making sure workers get paid the wages they deserve, helping returning veterans re-enter the workforce, protecting our seniors' retirement nest eggs, ensuring that a new mother can care for her baby without losing her job, the Department of Labor helps families build the cornerstones of a middle-class life. Now more than ever, we need strong leadership at the department to help strengthen our fragile recovery and build a stronger and revitalized American middle class. That's why this nomination is so important. Now, there's been a lot of public discussion about Mr. Perez, but remarkably little of it has focused on what should be the central question before our committee today. Will Tom Perez be a good Secretary of Labor? The answer is unequivocally yes. Without question, he has the knowledge and experience needed to guide this critically important agency. Through his professional experiences, and especially his work as Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor, Licensing, and Regulation, he has developed strong policy expertise about the many important issues for American workers and businesses that come before the Department of Labor every day. He spearheaded major initiatives on potentially controversial issues, such as unemployment insurance reform and worker misclassification, while finding common ground between workers and businesses to build sensible, common-sense solutions. He also clearly has the management skills to run a large federal agency effectively. He was also an effective manager and a responsible steward of public resources, undertaking significant administrative and organizational reforms that made the Maryland DLLR more efficient and more effective. His outstanding work in Maryland has won him the support of the business community and worker advocates alike. To quote from the endorsement letter of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Perez proved himself to be a pragmatic public official who was willing to bring differing voices together. The Maryland Chamber had the opportunity to work with Mr. Perez on an array of issues of importance to employers in Maryland, from unemployment and workforce development to the housing and foreclosure crisis. Despite differences of opinion, Mr. Perez was always willing to allow all parties to be heard, and we found him to be fair and collaborative. I believe that our experiences with him here in Maryland bode well for the nation." End quote. Now that's a pretty strong endorsement by a Chamber of Commerce for a nominee that the minority leader today on the floor characterized as, quote, "a crusading ideologue, willing to do or say anything to achieve his ideological ends," end quote, by the Republican leader today. But the Maryland Chamber of Commerce didn't seem to think so. So that grossly unfair characterization by the Republican leader is manifestly inconsistent with the experiences of the Republican leaders and businesses who have actually worked with Tom Perez. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record today letters from businesses and Republican leaders demonstrating the strong bipartisan support for Mr. Perez's nomination. These people clearly disagree with the Republican leader's assessment of Mr. Perez's qualifications and character. Indeed, I think Mr. Perez's character, is exactly what qualifies him for this job, his character. Tom Perez has dedicated his life to making sure that every American has a fair opportunity to pursue the American dream. At the Maryland Department of Labor, he revamped the state's adult education system so that more people could successfully train for better jobs and brighter futures. As the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice, where he is right now, he has been a voice for the most vulnerable, and he's reinvigorated the enforcement of some of our most critical civil rights laws. He has helped more Americans achieve the dream of home ownership through his unprecedented efforts to prevent residential lending discrimination. He's helped ensure that people with disabilities have the choice to live in their own homes and communities rather than only in institutional settings, and to make sure that people with disabilities receive the supports and services they need to make independent living possible. He has stepped up the department's efforts to protect the employment rights of service members so that our men and women in uniform can return to their jobs and support their families after serving their country. I can tell you that Tom Perez is passionate about these issues. He's passionate about justice and about fairness. And I believe these are qualities that Tom Perez learned at the hand of his former employer here in the Senate, our former committee chairman of the Health Committee, Senator Ted Kennedy, for whom Tom Perez worked here in the Senate. But as he explained at his confirmation hearing, he also learned from Senator Kennedy, quote, that idealism and pragmatism are not mutually exclusive, end quote. Mr. Perez knows how to bring people together to make progress on even controversial issues without burning bridges or making enemies. He knows how to hit the ground running and quickly and effectively become an agent of real change. Now that's exactly the kind of leadership we need at the Department of Labor. We need his vision. We need his passion. We need, yes, his character at the helm of this important agency. Now, allow me to state very clearly that while I know there has been generated controversy, not real controversy, but generated controversy surrounding Mr. Perez's nomination, there's absolutely nothing that calls into question his ability to fairly enforce the law as it is written. There's absolutely nothing that calls into question his professional integrity or his moral character or his ability to lead the Department of Labor. As I mentioned, Mr. Perez has been as open and above board as he could possibly be throughout this entire confirmation process. He has met with any member personally who requested a meeting. As I said, he appeared before our committee in a public hearing. He's answered more than 200 written questions. He's bent over backward to respond to any and all concern raised about his work at the Department of Justice. This administration, and President Obama has also been extraordinarily accommodating to any Republican colleague, especially to their concerns about Mr. Perez's involvement in the global resolution of 2 cases involving the city of St. Paul, Minnesota, Magner v. St. Paul and Newell v. St. Paul, these 2 cases. The administration has produced thousands of documents. They've arranged for the interview of government employees. They have facilitated almost unprecedented levels of disclosure to alleviate any concern about his involvement in these cases. As chairman of the committee, I've also tried to be as accommodating as possible, joining in requests for documents that I, quite frankly, thought were unnecessary, but willing to do, and postponing the executive session for 2 weeks to provide members additional time for consideration. All that this extensive process has revealed is that Mr. Perez acted at all times ethically and appropriately to advance the interests of the United States government. For example, with respect to the Magner and Newell matters, Mr. Perez consulted with both outside ethics and professional responsibility experts at the Department of Justice, and Mr. Perez acted within their guidelines at all times. And it's no surprise that outside ethics experts have confirmed that Mr. Perez acted appropriately in this manner. I'd like to submit again, Mr. President, for the record, letters and statements from several legal ethics experts and experts in the False Claims Act confirming that Mr. Perez's handling of the Magner and Newell cases was both ethical and appropriate. Mr. President, I ask consent to submit for the record these letters and statements.
Without objection, so ordered.
As Professor Stephen Gillers, who has taught legal ethics for more than 30 years at New York University School of Law, wrote in one of these letters, Mr. Perez's actions in these cases, quote, violated no ethical rule that governs lawyers. He was acting in what he believed to be the best interest of his client, which is what lawyers are required to do, end quote. In short, Mr. Perez did his job at DOJ, and he did it well. Now, when it comes down to it, I think the fact that he did his job well is probably the source of much of the generated controversy surrounding his nomination. I guess maybe some people just don't like Tom Perez, precisely because he is passionate about enforcing our civil rights laws and has vigorously pursued such enforcement in his current position. I take great issue with the minority leader's suggestion today that Mr. Perez doesn't follow the law or believe that it applies to him. I would respectfully suggest that the Republican leader needs to check his facts. To the contrary, Tom Perez has had a remarkable career as a result of a determination to make the promise of our civil rights statutes a reality for everyday Americans. Well, maybe these are some of the same laws that some colleagues sometimes would like to forget are on the books. But these laws matter. Voting rights matter. Fair housing rights matter. The rights of people with disabilities matter. These laws are part of what makes our country great. I'm incredibly proud of the work that Mr. Perez has done at the Department of Justice to make those rights a reality after years of neglect. He should be applauded, not vilified, for the service he has provided to this country. And Mr. President, it almost seems that when Mr. Perez's name came up, there was a controversy generated about these cases in St. Paul involving whistleblower claims, and that somehow he had acted inappropriately, denied the government the ability to get back a couple $100 million or so. That seemed to be a belief that some of my colleagues on the other side had. So we looked into it. We went through all the documents, all the emails, thousands of pages, ethics, lawyers, both in the government and out. And what we came up with is Mr. Perez acted ethically and appropriately at all times. There's no there. So the facts belie the belief. But it seems that the belief carries on, and that somehow the belief trumps the facts. Well, if some of my colleagues want to believe the worst about Tom Perez, they can believe that, but they have no facts to back it up. It is an unfounded belief. Is that what's going to guide this body in approving nominations for this president or any president? That if I believe something, and I can get maybe some of my colleagues to join in and believe it, that's enough, that's sufficient to vilify a nominee, to try to tear him down? What about the facts? Don't facts matter? Doesn't the record matter? Of course it does. And the facts are, as proven time and time again, that Mr. Perez acted ethically and appropriately at the Department of Justice at all times, and especially in the two cases, Magner v. St. Paul and Newell v. St. Paul. That's been clearly brought forward, that he acted appropriately and ethically. So I say to my colleagues on this side, believe what you want. But that belief, mistaken as it is, should not be used to tear down a good person, to vilify a good person, to cast this person in a light in which is totally false. So, Mr. President, yes, there was an objection to our meeting today under this obscure rule of the Senate, but we have rescheduled the meeting for a week hence. So, in a week, we will meet again, and we will vote to report out the nomination of Tom Perez. And then we'll come to the floor. And again, I hope that it won't be filibustered by my Republican colleagues, but that we'll be able to vote up or down on Mr. Perez, based not upon what someone believes, but what the facts are, what his record is, what his record has been both in local government, state government, at the Department of Justice. When you look at that record, it is an exemplary record of unstinting public service in the best interests of the civil rights and equal rights of our country. And that's why, with his background, his experience, his dedication to fairness and justice, the fact that he's actually worked in the Senate on the Help Committee, on the committee that has jurisdiction over the Department of Labor, gives him a tremendous background and insight in how to be a truly great Secretary of Labor. So we will vote next week. I hope there are not other kinds of roadblocks